we shall deal with a number of questions. To some of these questions, I shall endeavor to give a more in-depth answer, because I think there is importance to doing so. With regards to other questions, we shall simply give a yes or no type of answer. Keep in mind that Chazal say, and this is brought in Rambam Ilchot Talmud Torah, that when questions are asked, the Rav is at liberty, and in fact is instructed to prioritize certain kinds of questions over others. For example, because one question is more practical and a more common type of question that people need to know, as opposed to something which is more hypothetical. And based on those kinds of considerations, I've chosen to discuss a few questions more in depth and others less in depth. And what we don't cover today, we'll cover another time, B'ezrat Hashem. So the first question I wish to deal with today is the question of honeycomb, eating honeycomb. This is a question which applies all year round, but perhaps even more particularly leading up to Rosh Hashanah, because we all know about the minhag of eating honey on Rosh Hashanah in different ways, in different forms. And the question with regards to honeycomb, in other words, you buy the comb with the honey in it, and then you can bite into it and eat it and chew it. And eventually, what usually happens with the material from which the honeycomb itself is made, which is a kind of wax which the bees produce, which is not food. This is one of the important things to understand here, that the bees' wax is not considered a food. It is considered not ochel, but pesolet. It's essentially garbage. It's rubbish. We don't. You can use it perhaps for the purpose of wax. It can be useful in terms of, for example, perhaps sealing up a very small hole or a leak or something like that. As a wax, it might be useful, but as food, it is not food. Therefore, it's considered pesolet. So first of all, is there a problem biting into a piece of honeycomb in order to ingest the honey and eventually spit out the honeycomb, which is made of wax, as we said? The answer is no, and we'll go on to that. We'll explain that further in a moment. The question that I was asked specifically mentioned the possibility of the legs or parts of the legs of bees being present in the honeycomb or in the honey within the honeycomb. And this is not a new question. This has been discussed many, many centuries ago, 750 odd years ago. We find in the Mordechai, this is Rabbeinu Mordechai Bar-Hillel, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and Hashem Yikom Damo. He was murdered by Christians during a pogrom, a religiously motivated massacre of Jews. The Rabbeinu Mordechai Bar-Hillel was a Talmid Muvhak of Maharam Mirotenburg, Rabbeinu Meir Mirotenburg, who was also the Rav HaMuvhak of the Rosh. And at the end of the second perek of Avodah Zarah, he writes as follows. I'll quote the actual language briefly, and then I'll explain. V'chen keshemaltihim hadevash b'mahavat lahasir hasha'awa, when honeycomb is taken and heated up in a pan in order that the honey separate from the comb, from the wax. ולפעמים יש שם דבורים ואיברי דבורים. And sometimes in that situation you can find bees or parts of bees mixed up in what you end up with in the pan. ומכל מקום מותר לנותן טעם לפגמו. The first thing to know is that bees are not considered a desirable food. I know that Bill Gates would probably wish to disagree, and he and some of his friends like Klaus Schwab and Yuval Noah Harari and the rest of that criminal gang would all like us to subsist on insects. But normal human beings do not consider bees to be a normal source of food. We certainly do not. And therefore, whatever taste, when this, first of all, he's addressing the question of cooking these things together. When you heat them up in a pan, the wax and the honey separate, and there's also possibly certain bits and pieces of bees in this mixture. So does that impart a flavor? Is that noten ta'am to the honey which you are interested in? So the first thing to know is it's noten ta'am lifigran. It is not considered a desirable flavor, but rather an undesirable flavor, even if it doesn't in fact impart any flavor at all. The ta'am hadavorim poremhu. So the first thing he says is the flavor, any flavor imparted by bees into the honey, or parts of bees that exist or that are extant, would be considered a ta'am lifiram, and that would not mean that the honey would be asur. The honey remains mutar. However, he adds, rak sheyasir mamashuth hadavorim v'ragle hadavorim v'ha'ivarim. But you have to remove from the honey, which separates from the honeycomb, any legs of bees or any parts of bees that you are able to see. You have to remove that from the honey. So you could either strain it if that's a possibility, or you pick them out somehow. In other words, what you can see is asur, and you have to get rid of that. But that which remains, in other words, that which is not visible to the naked eye, is batel. It's not considered to exist, and the honey is mutar. This is written explicitly in the Mordechai. This is also mentioned in the Maharil. So that hashash, that possibility, has been discussed, as we see, many centuries ago, and the answer is that it is mutar. So that which remains, if anything at all remains, but you cannot see it, it's batel, and the honey is mutar b'achila. I even discovered in a certain halachic journal called Moriah, Kovetz Moriah, that a certain chacham by the name of Harav Rabbi Shalom Brander quoted or testified with regards to the Admor Rabbi Aharon Mibels, the Rebbe Mibels, used to eat, when the minhag of eating apple and honey came along on Rosh Hashanah, he used to specifically ask for and search for honeycomb, which he would eat, the real natural honeycomb he would eat and chew it, and that was his minhag of Rosh Hashanah. And the same fact is related with regards to Gaon Gadol Rabbeinu Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zetzal. That on Rosh Hashanah he also preferred to have real honeycomb and to eat it, and eventually what remained of the wax, etc., he would spit out. As we said, it's not food. So that's with regards to honeycomb. So it's mutar to buy honeycomb from a beekeeper. The beekeepers should endeavor to remove any such parts of bees and what have you from the honey beforehand, if as much as possible from the honeycomb. But the person buying it should look at it carefully, and anything that is visible to the naked eye needs to be removed. Otherwise, it's mutar. And the wax itself is not oser. It's not food. I wouldn't suggest swallowing it. It's not healthy at all, but it's not food. It's not a sur ba'achila. That's with regards to the question of honeycomb. The second question, which requires a fair amount of explanation and discussion, is using what are called in Hebrew magvonim lahim, or wipes. In other words, these moist wipes that people use, usually for changing babies or for other purposes. If one may use such things on Shabbat and Yom Tov, what is the possible chashash? Why would it be asur? Some people claim, or ahoshesh, they fear that it might be asur mishum sehita. In other words, we're talking here about a kind of cloth which is actually made from synthetic fibers. In fact, a few layers of these synthetic fibers are laid down and then placed on top of and pressed together. And then this cloth, which was made in such a way, is impregnated with a certain liquid, which has some cleaning agents in it and some kind of perfume, etc. Now, when you wipe one of these things on your hand, shall we say, or on the baby, some of that liquid ends up on the baby or on your hand or on your face, if that's what you're using it to wipe your face to freshen up. Some of that liquid ends up on your face, on the skin, on the person. So is that called sehita? Is that squeezing or removing a liquid from something solid, which is in certain cases, as we're about to discuss, which is asur? So let's understand first of all what we are really discussing here. It's important to understand at the outset that this entire question is, without a doubt, does not involve an isur, couldn't possibly involve an isur Torah. It could only possibly, theoretically, involve an isur d'Rabbanan. And what we shall see as we progress is that there is also no isur d'Rabbanan in using such wipes. Why is that? First, and the next thing we have to explain is that there are two kinds of sehita. One kind has to do with libun, which has to do with laundry, with washing clothing. In other words, if you're washing a garment, anything made of cloth, shall we say, a towel, doesn't matter, and you're washing it and you want to, by hand, what would you do? You would soak it in water, first of all, and then you would wring it out. You would squeeze out all the water, because just that action alone would already remove quite a bit of the dirt. Then you'd probably do it again with some detergent, and then you would place it in the water again and mix it around, etc. And then you would again remove it from the water, and you would squeeze out that water. That action of squeezing out water from a garment is asur, and it's called mishum. It's called sehita, but it springs from the isur of libun. Libun has to do with laundering, with washing and cleaning garments. Now, why is that not relevant in this case? Because it's clear that the cloth, the wipe that we're discussing, is not being cleaned by this process. In fact, quite the opposite. The cloth itself is becoming dirty, not clean. It's the exact opposite of laundering a garment. When you launder a garment, you place it in a liquid, in water, obviously, with soap perhaps, and you soak it, and then you wring out the garment, that act of wringing out the water also removes a lot of the dirt and removes eventually the soap, etc. Without that action, the garment will not become clean. So squeezing, the sehita of the garment, is an essential part of libun, of cleaning the garment. And the Bet Yosef discusses this concept with regards to cleaning washed glasses on Shabbat, etc. In Or Haim Siman Shin Bet, he quotes the Tashbetz and says as follows, that when the garment that you're using, which you may be making wet with water by wiping these glasses dry, this cloth that you're using to dry the glasses is not becoming cleaner by so doing, it's becoming dirtier. The idea of not mixing water with, not putting a garment into water, or not placing water onto a garment. For example, if you on Shabbat you're at the Shabbat table and something spills on your shirt, you cannot take some water, and even a small amount, even a few drops, and place it on the spot of dirt on your shirt and rub it, etc., to remove the stain. That is exactly the operation, the melacha, that is asur, that is the act of libun, of cleaning and of laundering a garment on Shabbat. But when you take a cloth to dry something which is wet, and you may be making this cloth wet now, and eventually by using it again and again, you may even be squeezing some of the water out of it eventually as it's being used for this purpose. But this cloth is not becoming clean, it's becoming dirty, quite the opposite. So the Bet Yosef says explicitly, this is not considered libun. So clearly, this wipe is not being cleaned by being used in any fashion. It's becoming dirty. So there's no question of libun involved here. That is with regards to the concept of sehita, which pertains to the isur of libun, washing, laundering garments. There is another kind of sehita, which has nothing to do with libun. It has to do with dash. Dash is the melacha of removing a food item, like a grain of wheat, that is the classic example. Taking a grain of wheat, which grows in its natural state, you're interested in the seed, within the husk. There is husks, a number of husks and shells surrounding the germ of grain, the actual seed that you're interested in, which you then go on to grind, etc. You don't want all those husks and all those shells. So what do? In the ancient world, you place a lot of grain on the threshing floor, in the place where this is done, and it's threshed. How is it threshed? The simple way would be to take some animal, like a donkey or a horse or a cow, and get it to walk all over these sheaves of wheat. By so doing, it would crush the shells and the husks, and the part of the wheat that you're interested in, which is the seed itself, would be caused to be removed from that shell. And then, of course, you would have to gather up everything that was not in this way crushed and smashed by the animal. It could also be done by human beings. Then you have to separate all the chaff from the wheat, quite literally, which would be done by tossing it in the air in the evening, usually when there's a bit of a breeze, and as is mentioned in the Targum in Meridat Ruth, and thus you end up and eventually toss it into the air. The grain is heavy as opposed to the chaff, which is very light. The wind blows away the chaff, and the wheat falls to the ground. It's more or less straight down, and that's how you end up with the wheat that you're interested in. That pu'ula, that action, is the malacha of dash. Dash is to break open, to break down, and crush and cause the food within to become available. Now, another example of this is, again, the classic example when it comes to liquid, as opposed to dry, solid food like wheat, is wine or olive oil. In other words, mina Torah, it is asur to press either grapes in order to obtain the grape juice, from which you should either drink as grape juice, as tirosh, or you can make it into wine, of course, which was the usual practice, and that was the most desirable thing that one could do with grapes. In the case of olives, you can eat olives, of course, and they did eat some olives, but most of the olives were used for producing olive oil, which is something of great value. And it has to be understood that the word value here is very important. The melacha of dash, when it comes to a fruit, shall we say, something like a grape, which has within it this juice, or the olive, which has within it the oil, that pu'ula, that action is called mefarek. In other words, you are removing. Lefarek is to remove or to open up and to disassemble. You are disassembling the olive or the grape, and you are removing this juice which is in it, which is what you want. You want it more than you want the grape itself. You want the oil more than you want the olive. The olive is also good, and some of the olives you will probably eat, but most of the olives will go for oil, because oil is the important product. And this is important to understand. The melacha of dash has to do with taking an item and removing from it, obtaining from it. You can also eat grapes, as someone has pointed out in the comment. Yes, of course you can, but and are different kinds of grapes. But the kinds of grapes that go for wine are usually reserved for the making of wine, because wine is much more desirable than grapes, and also much more valuable. As I said before, value is a very important element in this discussion, because you could ask the question, why is the halacha that it's only grapes and olives that minat Torah you may not press in order to obtain that liquid, the grape juice or the oil? Because in these two cases, more than in any other case, the juice which you thus obtain is worth a great deal more than the item that you had a moment ago. A moment ago you had a grape, or you had an olive, which has some value, has also a commercial value in the market and the shuk. But the wine that you can produce from it, or the grape juice, the tirosh, or the oil that you can produce from it, will be worth many, many times more, probably 10 times more, sometimes 100 times more in the case of very expensive wine, shall we say. So, dash and mefarek, when it comes to food, and when it comes to liquid particularly, you are trying to obtain something which is of much greater value than what you have at this present moment. With regards to something like oranges, which the Talmud does not discuss, they didn't have oranges, as far as we know. There, according to most poskim, squeezing an orange on Shabbat is asur, but min divrei sofarim, not min haTorah, because oranges are more frequently eaten in their original form. They can also be turned into orange juice, but how many oranges do you need to produce? Do you need to have in order to produce a certain amount of orange juice? You need or apples. How many apples do you need to produce a certain amount of apple juice? You need a very large number of apples. And the relative value of the differential in value is not so obvious, not at all. When it comes to oil and wine, the differential in value is immense. So when it comes to the action of sehita, of squeezing, of pressing out a liquid from something that is in the realm of food, in the realm of fruit, shall we say, it is the value and the value of the thing that you're obtaining, which is the juice, and that is what you're aiming for. But if you were to squeeze the grape and end up with nothing, there'll be no juice. It would all disappear somehow. Then that would not be considered an action, a melacha of dash, of mefarek, because mefarek means that you're squeezing and removing something which is inside the grape or inside the olive, and now you end up with this substance, this oil, shall we say, in front of you, with which you can do something. Now, take the example of these. Let us take our discussion here further with regards to these wipes. First of all, there is a fact that the Talmud states in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Ayin Hey, En disha ela leridule karka. In other words, disha is only applies to things which grow in the ground. Rambam also writes this explicitly in Chol Shabbat Perek Heth. Says the Ramban, the Rashba. This is generally agreed. It's only things which grow in the ground, like wheat or like grapes or like olives, that disha is relevant. The action of disha is relevant. Now, obviously, these wipes don't grow in the ground, and the liquid also that is somehow with which they are impregnated does not come from the ground, nor is it a liquid that you're looking for. In other words, no one wants to end up with a vessel or a cup or something in which you have this liquid from the wipe. No one wants that. No one's interested in that. And when you do use it to, let's say, clean the baby, where is that liquid gone? The liquid is on the baby's skin for a moment, and it dries within a moment, and it disappears. And the wipe itself, of course, is thrown away. So we have several reasons why. First, that we've mentioned already, why this is not an Isur Torah, but it could only possibly be an Isur Torah Banan. First of all, the fact is that there's no libun, there's no laundering involved here, because the article in question is becoming dirty. Second of all, we have the statement in the Talmud in Masechet Shabbat. We have Daf Mem Kof Mem Daled Kof Mem Hey. We have the question. The Gemara speaks about mashkeh haba leibud. In other words, there the Talmud is discussing a person who takes, shall we say, grapes, and grabs a bunch of grapes in his hand, and he wants to, he draws them across a loaf of bread that he wishes to bake, and he wants that liquid from the grapes to be on the top of the loaf of bread, because maybe because of the flavor, but also because it adds brightness. It's like brushing egg on a challah. It adds some color or bright or shine to the bread. Talmud there states that this is considered mashkeh haba leibud. In other words, the mashkeh, the liquid, is lost. It disappears. It doesn't end up in its own right there before us in a cup. It's not like oil from a grape. It's not like the olive. It's not like grape juice from a grape. It disappears, even though it's there. It's on the bread. It's in the bread, but you don't really see it, and you don't collect it, and therefore it's not considered. And therefore it's not considered mashkeh, which is nefurak. It's the action of dash doesn't apply to such a thing. The Tosafot will also write this in Masechet Ketubot Daf Waw, that if something is nishat and it goes olech leibud, it's not considered schita. We also have the concept of chatzi shi'ur with divrei soferim. In other words, if you were to take a wipe, even 2 or 3 or 4 of them, and you were to squeeze them with all your strength into a cup, how much liquid would you obtain? A very, very small amount. It's very difficult to even to measure, but certainly not a reasonable amount. All melachot, such as sehita, such as squeezing or pressing out a liquid, have a shi'ur. The shi'ur for sehita or dash is grogeret. In other words, the size or the volume of a dried fig. You would not end up with that much, certainly not from 1 or 2 wipes. And the halacha is, not like Rashi, but most Rishonim, that when it comes to melachot of Shabbat, Chasi shiur is mutar. or at the most, divrei sofarim it's asur, but not min haTorah. Not like eating something which is asur, when the rule is that chatzi shiur is asur min haTorah. But when it comes to the shiur of a malacha, the definition of a malacha, chatzi shiur is not asur min haTorah. So for all these reasons, we're talking about something which at the very most could be derabanan. So again, to sum up, we have the fact that there's no libun, there's no washing or cleaning of the garment or this cloth in question. There is the fact that it's not gidulei karka, doesn't grow in the ground. There is the fact that there's no shiur, there's not the requisite amount. We also mentioned that the thing in question becomes dirty and not clean. It's also a fact that the Magen Avraham writes in Siman Shin Yod Daled that when you have something which is only possibly an Isur Darabanan, 3 Isurei Darabanan, maybe, then that action is mutar lechatchila. The Taz actually says 2 is sufficient, but the Magen Avraham says 3 is sufficient. So here we have at least 3 and possibly 4. But the truth of the matter is that the 2 best proofs why it's mutar to use these malchvanim on Shabbat, and I'm speaking about this at length because there are those who make a big deal about these magvolim, about these wipes, and some people are told you have to take them before Shabbat and squeeze them out before Shabbat and then put them inside a plastic bag and tie it up, and then on Shabbat we remove it from the plastic bag and clean up the baby with it, etc., etc., which for a number of reasons, as we're explaining now, is not correct, and in fact may even make things worse. I won't go into all of that now, but it certainly doesn't help. But the fact is some people are doing these things and some people are concerned, so this has to be explained properly. So we have what the Gemara states in Masechet Shabbat Kof Mem Daled Kof Mem Hey Hamachlik Ba'anavim, a person who takes grapes and wipes it and sort of squeezes it across the top of the loaf of bread that he wishes now to bake. All the same would be true also, shall we say, a cake. There are certain kinds of cakes where you squeeze an orange over the cake. Now that juice is absorbed onto the top of the cake, but you don't end up with any visible, any appreciable liquid. So the Talmud there says that liquid is lo huchshar because it's not lo huchshar letuma or l'inyanei tuma v'tahara, because it's not considered liquid, because it goes leibud, it disappears, it doesn't have any existence of its own. So we have the concept of mashke haba leibud, or a mashke ha'omed lesach zaho. In other words, something which mashke which we're not interested in it for its own sake, but only because it makes something else shiny, shall we say? In other words, the liquid is incidental in the process or the action that we're doing. We're not interested in the liquid itself in a form that we can afterwards look at and use and measure, such as oil or wine. All of these various discussions indicate clearly that, and this is mutar. It's mutar to take those grapes and do that on Shabbat. Well, on Shabbat you wouldn't bake, but on Yom Tov, shall we say, or to do it onto a cake on Shabbat. You could also do that even on Shabbat. The general rule is, the halacha is that if you squeeze, even if you take grapes and you squeeze them, some of the juice from the grapes into some kind of dish that you have that you wish to eat on Shabbat, if the amount of juice involved is not very great, so then you mix it up with the food, and the juice is not appreciably visible or noticeable, and it's all mixed up with the food. That's called mashke haba le'ochel, and it's not considered mashke. It doesn't have any halachic significance as a mashke, as a liquid. The best possible proof that it's mutar is a Tosefta in Masechet Shabbat, towards the end of Masechet Shabbat, Perek Tet Zayin or Yod Zayin, depending on the version that you have. This is a very interesting statement. I will share this here with you for a moment, so you can follow along. The Tosefta states over here, Molich Adan. Adan is like a person. A person may take Shemen harbe ba'alun tioth, or luntayot, or something like that, which means towels. You may take some towels on Shabbat to the bathhouse or to a place, a pool of water where it's mutar to bathe on Shabbat, or it could be inside a courtyard or something like that. You can't carry it in the street, obviously, but you can take a number of towels, molich adam shemen harbe, a lot of oil, olive oil, and impregnate these towels with lots of oil. In other words, you soak them in oil first, let's say before Shabbat, and maybe before Shabbat you even squeeze that out a bit. But now they're still very oily. They're full of oil. You're allowed to carry those with you to the merchatz. Molich adan shemen harbe vanuntiyot harbe la merchatz. You may do so. Take it to the bathhouse or to the pool of water where you're going to bathe. Wasach kol gufo evar evar. You may wash. I'm sorry, not wash. You may anoint, literally. You may wipe these towels on your body, one limb at a time, one part of your body at a time, in order that you do it in a way which is different from during the week. You do it b'shinui, so you do one part of the body at a time. You wipe it on your body, so some of that oil ends up on your skin, which is what you wanted. Umekaneach kol gufo evar evar, and then you can also wipe yourself down with another cloth, which is not oil in it. We'no choshesh, and it's no problem. It's not a sore. And I go on. Rabbi Shaul Lieberman Zetzal explains that this baraita, this tosefta, is telling us there's no isur of schita when it comes to this action. Why? Because first of all, as we said before, the towel is not becoming cleaner by so doing; it's only becoming dirtier, and you also don't care about the fact that it's becoming dirty or that it's full of oil. And it's not considered dash or mefarek because, again, the oil doesn't end up somewhere noticeable, separate from the towel in which it was before. The oil ends up on your body. That's considered that it's gone le'ibud, it's disappeared. It doesn't have its own existence now. Now it's making your skin shiny, I should say. It's making your skin shiny. It's making your skin supple, whatever it is, but it doesn't have its own existence as oil in itself. So when you think about it, this example of the Tosefta is precisely analogous to the question of the wipe, these wipes. The wipes are a kind of cloth which have a certain liquid in them, and when you wipe them on your skin, you end up with some of that liquid on your skin. And that's exactly what you're doing here with these towels. You take a towel which was saturated with oil, and you wipe it on yourself in order that some of that oil remain on your skin, on your body, and the Tosefta says explicitly that it is mutar to do so. So I think that is the best possible proof. These all of the above are the best possible proofs that it is mutar to use these moist wipes, in Hebrew, magvonim lahim, on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Another question that many people have asked in recent days, because Rosh Hashanah is coming up, has to do with, this is relevant for those who intend to keep Rosh Hashanah one day in Eretz Yisrael, not 2 days. So what do they do in terms of Havdalah, Kiddush on the second night? What about other members of their family who perhaps are uneasy with this idea, etc., which I can understand. So the question that I was asked by a number of people was, can you make Kiddush for those people who are keeping 2 days, number one, and can you not make Havdalah that first night and wait to make Havdalah the second night and rely on the Havdalah that you mention in the Tefillah, assuming that you daven that kind of Tefillah where you say Havdalah ben Kodesh L'chol. In my view, it is possible to rely on the Havdalah recited in Tefillah, it's certainly not a good idea to cause strife or tension in the family for such a reason. And with regards to making kiddush, first of all, it's possible that someone else might make kiddush, but it's also possible to make kiddush yourself, even if you're holding that it's not now Rosh Hashanah, because according to many poskim, it should be Rosh Hashanah, and you should be keeping Rosh Hashanah. It's a mahloket, true, and there are many Rishonim on whom we can rely and say kiddush, because according to them, that's what we should be doing. And you're doing it for other people. And even if you say, well, it's a bracha levatala, well, I would tell you that a bracha levatala, the halacha is, as stated by Rabbeinu Tam and the Ran and many, many others, and not like some of the Geonim, a bracha levatala is not minat Torah. The Yisur is not minat Torah, but is midarabanan. And in such a case, to prevent machloket and problems, etc., or for the children, it's mutar to do so. Now, there were a few other questions that I want to deal with here more briefly. One could go into answering some of these questions in a more detailed manner, which we might do on another occasion. But in case some of these questions are important and pressing for some people, I will read out some of the questions. One of them had to do with the following: is it permissible to cook and eat pre-cracked and raw eggs from a non-Jew? And what about eating pre-cracked hard-boiled eggs? All right, so there is such a concept which comes up in the Talmud, the Masechet Nida, but without going into this discussion at length, the question here was being asked on the one hand by people who apparently you can buy eggs that have been cracked and removed from the shell and placed in some kind of a vessel, which you can buy them ready to cook, ready to fry, useful for picnics or hikes or what have you, apparently. That's one question. The other question was about a hard-boiled egg, which was shelled, but not eaten at that time, and you eat it later. There is an opinion which seems to be based on some kind of superstition that it is asur to eat such an egg. The fact of the matter is, not only does the Rambam and the Rif and many others not bring this isur, it's also a fact that the Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring it. It's also a fact that in some of the Rishonim we have explicit statements to the effect that the minhag of the olam, the minhag of the Jews, is to ignore this concept and carry on as if it doesn't exist at all. In fact, there are very few sources that take it very seriously as some halachic isur, prohibition, and therefore the answer, in my humble opinion, is that it is mutar. It's not something to be concerned about. It's not considered halacha ma'aseh. Another question that I was asked, that was sent, was about milk from surgically enhanced cows. And it's not just milk, it's also other products made from that milk. There are some Rabbanim who have discussed that. Now, what are we talking about, surgically enhanced cows? There are certain surgical procedures which involve introducing a kind of tube into the animal's stomach. You won't go into all the details, you can look it up if you're interested on the internet, which have to do with increasing milk production or solving certain medical issues that some of the cows, for example, may suffer from. Does this render the behemah, the animal, a trefa? In other words, this is a kind of procedure which involves puncturing the side of the animal's abdomen. Does this make them trefa? Some Rabbanim have expressed the opinion that it does. Others have said that it's not so, because we see that this procedure is done repeatedly. It's been done in millions of cases, and it's almost without exception successful, and the cow is fine and lives a long life, maybe a longer life than before, and does not affect the cow's health in any negative way at all. And that is also my view on the subject. Such procedures, which, whether they're a good idea or a bad idea, is another question, and whether they should be done or not be done, that has to do with all kinds of commercial and veterinary considerations. But in terms of causing the cow to become a terefa, I do not think it causes the cow to be considered a terefa. Another question that was asked was as follows: the correct bracha for peanut butter or tehina golmith. In other words, we all know what peanut butter is. It's peanuts that are basically ground up. Maybe some other things were mixed into it, like salt and sugar, but it's basically ground up peanuts, a paste made from peanuts. The same, of course, is true of tehina. Tehina just means ground, and we're talking about sesame seeds. And you grind them up, and you end up with a paste, which, if you want to make into the usual kind of tehina that people eat with bread or what have you, then you mix some water and some salt and lemon and black pepper and what have you. What is the bracha on such foods? If you want to just take a spoon of peanut butter and eat it as is. Of course, if you eat it spread on a piece of bread, then it's obviously tafel, and the bread is the ikar, and you make the bracha on the ikar, or poteret tafel. So you don't make a bracha on the peanut butter, you make a bracha on the bread. The same was true of tahina. If you eat tahina on bread, it's a tafel to the bread, and it has no status of its own. It's not important enough to make its own bracha. It's considered part of the bread. But if you eat it by itself, what is the bracha? Shahakol or ha'adama? The truth is, there is a mahloket about this, and it's a very involved sugya, in fact. We could give a shiur, we could discuss this literally for hours. It's involved. There's a sugyot in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, and there's mahlokot amongst the Rishonim. I won't go into all of that now because time is of the essence. So, in my humble opinion, when it comes to things like peanut butter or tahina, golmith, in other words, raw sesame paste, on the same would also apply, by the way, to what people call hummus, which should be called afuna. Chickpeas in Hebrew, really, in the Mishnah, referred to as afuna. So what people refer to as hummus, which is really Arabic, the translation of afuna, which appears in the Mishnah, in Rambam's Perush on the Mishnah, when he translates the word afuna in the Mishnah, he writes al-hummus, which is the Arabic word for a chickpea. And therefore, we really should be calling hummus afuna or mimrah afuna, in other words, chickpea spread. So if you want to eat hummus by or afuna by the spoonful, or tahina or peanut butter or the like, I think the bracha should be borei peri ha'adama. For a number of reasons. I only give one reason here, and that is because this is not only a common and normal way of consuming that product, it's also considered by many to be the ideal way to consume that product. So it has a certain hashivuth to it, just like the liquid that you obtain by cooking vegetables, stewing vegetables for a long time in water. One example of this would be what we call in Yiddish or in Eastern European languages, borscht, which is a kind of beetroot soup, or the liquid from such a concoction. What bracha do you make on that liquid? The opinion of many Rishonim is, including the Rambam and the Rosh, etc., that you say borei peri adama, even though you're drinking the liquid. You're not eating anything which grew in the ground. It's not obviously the thing which grew in the ground. It's obviously now in a different form, a very different form. Yes, it's true, the Ra'ah and the Ritva disagree, but the simple pshat, I think, is that a food which is prepared in that fashion deliberately to be consumed in that fashion it's even considered a higher form of the original food. It's a little bit similar to what we discussed before about grapes and about olives. Borscht is worth a lot more than the beetroots themselves. So I think the correct bracha is borei peri ha'adama. Another question was asked with regards to rain. When it rains, there's a bracha to be said. According to the Mishnah, according to the Talmud Yerushalmi, the bracha is Hatov wa Mitiv. This is in Eretz Yisrael certainly the case, and also in many other countries, certainly in the rainy season when rain is necessary. So what happens if in your area it rained and rain was necessary? It's a good thing that it rained there, but you were not there to see it. You only heard about it. So the question was, if one wakes up and sees it rained overnight, or heard that it rained in one's home city, but you were elsewhere, should one say the bracha tov or metiv? In other words, does it depend on being aware of the fact, on the besorah, on the news, that it is so, that this has happened, or does it depend on actually seeing it happen? So with regards to rain, I do not think it depends. It's necessary that you actually see the rain. Let's say you were asleep at night. It rained during the night. Either you heard it or you didn't hear it at night. You were too busy sleeping. You woke up in the morning and you see that everything is wet and everything, even though it's stopped right now, but now everything outside is wet. It's obviously been raining. I think you definitely say the bracha tov v'mitiv. You don't have to actually see the rain falling. It's enough to see the result of the rain. You see the rain on the ground. You see it on the rooftops. It says both in the Bavli and in the Yerushalmi that in Eretz Yisrael, when it rains enough to make the roof tiles wet, you make a bracha. Well, let's say it rained 10 minutes ago. You were in your office busy doing something. You didn't even notice the rain at that time, but then you happen to look outside the window and you see that all the roofs are wet. I think you make the bracha, even if you were not aware of the rain at the exact moment when it was falling from the sky. As for the besorah, in other words, hearing the news that it rains somewhere is not the same as seeing. Hearing is not the same as seeing. Seeing is believing, as the expression goes. So I don't think it's enough to hear that it rained. I think you actually have to see the rain itself, or as it's falling, or the immediate aftermath of that rainfall. Another question that was asked, which again one could give an entire shiur about, but as I have mentioned on other occasions, most people, let's take Leil Shabbat, Shabbat meal. Most people say Kiddush, they say Hamotzi, they begin eating some bread, and then very often, many people, I would think today, most people at some point in the meal no longer eat bread because there are other things to eat. There's soup. Some people eat bread with soup. That's okay. That's fine. But then let's say afterwards that you end up with, you have potatoes or rice and meat or chicken, vegetables. At that point, many people are not interested in bread at that point any longer, either because they're too full or because it just doesn't interest them to eat bread at this point. So now you're eating chicken or rice or potatoes by themselves without bread. Should you make hamotzi? Or rather, should the bracha of hamotzi that you recited at the beginning of the meal, does this also now poter? Does this exempt the foods that you're eating now, or do they require their own bracha? My understanding is they require their own bracha. As long as you are still eating bread, if you intend to go on eating bread, not every second, it does not with every mouthful, but if you are still, the bread is still in front of you and you intend to eat of it as you are eating your chicken, then yes, you don't have to make a bracha on that chicken. But if you no longer have any intention of eating bread with this piece of chicken, and most people don't eat potatoes with bread, then those foods require their own bracha. And I think this is essentially agreed to by all the Rishonim with the exception of Rashi. All the Geonim and all the Rishonim with the exception of Rashi. Another question, which is connected to what we just discussed, has to do with the drinks. When you say hamotzi, does that cover water, juice, beer, what have you, during the meal? This is also something we could discuss at length. Here we'll just say as follows. It's a mahloketh, which is not unusual when it comes to such things, and particularly to do with various halachot to do with the meal. There are many mahlokot, many differences of opinion. The Rosh used to always drink a bit of water before a meal, and say sha'akol, so that he wouldn't have this question on his mind during the meal. And I think that's a good idea to do so. But let's say you did not do so. Then I think that you should make a bracha on water or other drinks during the meal, shehakol. Another person asked the question, should one say a bracha on whiskey during a bread meal? The answer is yes. I think one should make a bracha on whiskey. Whiskey is not included. It's not always a part of every meal. It's not necessarily, doesn't necessarily go together with the bread. It stands alone. It has also a certain great hashivut, in fact. And even if you drank it after finishing eating the meal, but before saying Birkat Hamazon, I think it definitely, even there it's even more obvious that you would need to make a separate baracha, because then it's like a kind of dessert. And dessert, according to the din, according to the halacha, even though most people perhaps do not know this or act in accordance with this halacha, the halacha is that dessert requires its own baracha, both before and after. So if you have for dessert a piece of melon, for example, you have to say Borei Pri Adama before and Borei Nefashot afterwards, before Birkat Hamazon. Or if you didn't, you can say it after Birkat Hamazon also. It doesn't really matter. But it requires its own bracha, Lifnei v'Harei, Lifnehem v'Harehem, as the Talmud states. And the same is true of some whiskey that you drink at the end of the meal. Because whiskey is a small amount, so you probably don't have a shiur, but a shehakol definitely is required. Those are the questions that we are. Someone has a question here, I see, which I wanted to end on this topic. But what is the question here? Let's just see. Okay, let me try and deal with a couple of these questions that were sent in over the chat. We discussed the eating of grapes. Yes, grapes can be eaten, but the juice from grapes, which becomes wine, is much more valuable, as we discussed. Is there a question of memareach on the baby? The answer to that question is no. There is no issue of memareach. That's another discussion, but we've discussed this before. I in fact saw recently, not only was it the opinion of Muri Hagon Rabbi Yosef Gafech that regular soap, even hard soap, may be used on Shabbat, and there's no isur of memareach. I recently saw that Hagaon Rabbeinu Avadia Yosef Zatzal was also of this opinion. No, there is no inyan of memareach. Memareach has to do only with taking something like a piece of wax, which is hard, and then working it and softening it and making it pliable and therefore make it usable in a certain way for which it was not possible to be used beforehand. That's the sort of memareach. That does not apply to creams or to soap and the like. The last question for today. Someone asked the question here, is it possible to do Natilat Yadayim before Kiddush and then directly continue from Kiddush directly onto Hamotzi? Or does one have to do does one have to wash one's hands after Kiddush and before Hamotzi? This too is a mahloket. According to the Rambam and most of the Geonim, the Rif, you have to you should not, definitely should not do Natilat Yadayim before Kiddush. However, according to Rabbeinu Tam, the Rashbam, Ria Zaken, Rabbeinu Yitzchak Zaken, Ba'al Tosafot, and many others, it is mutar. It is mutar to do so, and in fact, that was their custom. We know for a fact that those Chachamim, those tremendous Chachamim, Rabbothehem Shekol Yisrael, the Rashbam and Rabbeinu Tam and Ria Zaken, etc. This was their common regular practice every Leil Shabbat, every Friday night. And in fact, that is what I also do. And I think it's definitely mutar to do so. This, by the way, is also the minhag of the Ashkenazim, which is quoted in the Ramah, the Shulchan Aruch, as the standard minhag. The Yekim, some Yekim, even to this day, still do so. So the answer is yes, it is. In my view, it's mutar to do so, even lechatchila. We shall end here for today. Hayu beruchim, hizku v'yames levavchem. Kol HaMiyahalim L'Adonai.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.